We had a chance to chat just a little bit outside, and thank you again, both of you, for being here. And Josh, I certainly want to get to your story, but having just seen the film, I'll start with Natalie. And the obvious question, just to get it out of the way, is why this story drew you as a filmmaker, as someone who's been involved in film on the other side of the camera as well?
It's interesting. I answer this question frequently at Q&As, and I think the easiest way to say it is it was just there was a calling that was not logical. It was a news story, but I was incredibly compelled by Sarah, Shane, and Josh. Early on in the process, their families and friends had set up a couple of different websites where you could find out more information about who they all were. And I had gone to these websites and I had read articles and I had gotten to know a fair bit about the value systems and the work that they had all been doing prior to this ordeal. And I was like, these are the people you need out in the world. You know, these are global citizens doing everything they can to make the world a better place. Why can't we go get them? And that was the spirit in which I felt like I had to do something. There was a Facebook page that was listing vigils around the country, and pretty early on there was one happening in Los Angeles, and a lot of Sarah's high school friends were at this particular vigil because she had gone to high school in LA, and I asked to be put in touch with somebody, and they put me in touch with Sarah's mom, and I just asked if I could come and interview her and see what that would look like, and she said yes. And 5 years later, we have this film.
So, did you know what kind of film you were going to make?
I think all of those pieces are very important, and I think that you couldn't make a film about this subject without touching on all of those pieces and contextualizing with all of those pieces. But what I was so moved by were the families and the fact that this was someone's brother, this was someone's son, this was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's brother, and I felt that the way that I could tell the story best, and I know there are other ways the story could have been told, but I knew that from what I understood about storytelling, I wanted people to be able to relate to people, and so that was what I focused on, and that was what I cared about.
Natalie didn't know the ending. She didn't know whether it was going to be 2 more months, 2 more weeks, or 2 more years, or more. So just realized that must have been a really more difficult situation than telling. I don't know if you have anything to say about that. Well, I'll just say that for me in prison, I guess I was in the process of, I didn't think of it this way at the time because I wasn't thinking of narrative, but I was always storytelling to myself about what has happened to me. So I'm thinking the first month in solitary, I was pretty devastated, and that was the hardest month of my whole time. I mean, I distinctly remember a letter from Sarah's mother that she shared with Shane and I that was just saying, Sarah, this is huge, and we just were like, and she was saying there's like vigils in 15 cities, and you know, and this was maybe 6 months in, and so we were trying to get it, but when I look back, and even then, I remember recognizing that whenever I got information, I got really excited. Oh, everyone cares, and then a few days, a week would pass, and it would slowly slip from my consciousness. And I remember being in the cell with Shane and being like, do you think they still are doing anything? You know, they probably have to move on with their lives. There's not much more they could have done. And then we'd get, 2 months later, we'd get another batch of letters saying, like, no, well, we got in touch with Muhammad Ali and, the president of Iraq and Oman, and, there would be like this list of people. So it was a back and forth.
For Josh, that collision of reality, knowing that the whole world, or having it gradually sink in that the whole world was watching, when you couldn't get out at all and you couldn't see anybody, was it difficult to reconcile those two realities?
And just feeling bad that my family was going through that, and that they were working so hard out there, and that so many people were working so hard. On the other side, there were feelings of it was a grasping to find something to make it seem like it was worth it. To make something, whether it was what we were studying in the cell, or the I was going to be a better person, and then therefore it'd be worth it. And we never hear any positive news from the outside that the families were getting closer. It was heartening to me that something positive was coming out of it. And then, of course, the idea that something positive politically could happen, which sort of felt fanciful at the time. And of course, when it got out, the fact that the countries came together was positive development.
There was a day that it was the first weekend that Sarah, Shane, and Josh all came to Los Angeles. I had met, I had spent a lot of time with Sarah. Sarah had been released a year earlier, as you know. And I had met Shane and Josh previously in Oakland, but there was an LA weekend, and there was all of this footage. We still hadn't even really started editing yet, but there was all of this footage of the family members and talking, and my friend Bobby, who was very instrumental in the film being made, we set up just hours of footage for the three of you to watch. We had a major release once you guys were released, because we had been holding so much of the emotion of what was happening as well. But I think that was really interesting, because that was the first time I think you guys got to really see what your family members had been experiencing while you were in prison. So that was a day.
I mean, for me, the movie, the most emotional part of the movie, for me, is watching my family get emotional. And so when I sit and watch my brother cry, my brother does not cry very much. And so when I see him, in the room getting choked up about that, I just feel like it really brings me to the depth of the experience. Because it's 4.5 years since I've been in prison, and it takes a little bit to kind of really remember. I was talking to my brother earlier today, and it takes some effort. It takes something, an entryway to get back to how crazy that was, how the depth of the feelings that we had that we moved on from now. Well, let me tell you, the trial was July 31st, and they said in 3 weeks you'll find out what the sentence was. So they brought us back to the courthouse, and they put us in a different room. It was kind of a small, intimate room with the judge, and he's on his cell phone talking to various people, and no idea what he was saying. We had a translator over here, and then he at some point spits out what our sentence is, and I see our translator write the number 3 on his piece of paper as if he's about to translate but wants to take notes first. I think, does that mean he's going to hold us for 3 years? But we've already done 2, and there's 1 more. And part of me is like, I really don't want to spend another year in here. And the other part of me is, well, at least it's like a definite end date, and we'll be out in here. And it was this real, I couldn't imagine another year. But then he wrote 5. 3 years was for crossing the border, 5 years for espionage. So then it was 8. And, me and Shane were taking, at this point, you have to understand, we were watching Iranian news every day, which is, it's sort of on par with Fox in this sort of sense of how transparent certain biases are. So we really got a sense of a little bit of a humor in the regime. In fact, it was kind of our only humor. And so we were betting on how long we were going to get sentenced. And, we had the over-under was about 20 years. So when it was 8, I had a little bit of relief. And I had even more relief when the people who drove us back to the prison, the guards, we were trying to act like we were indignant about it, as if we were surprised we got sentenced and we were surprised we were guilty by the court. Of course we were going to be sentenced by, it was a joke, the courtroom. So they said they were like, look, this is BS. This is what happens here. You're going to be out soon.
Yeah, I know you said you were going to law school, and something you might have done had this not happened, but perhaps not. And I'm just wondering if not like you had to go, but if it would have felt like you were turning your back on this whole experience if you weren't doing something with it.
I don't feel like I have to do anything anymore, but it's taken me a long time to get here. And I kind of wish I'd gotten here sooner because it's no fun to kind of be doing it out of guilt or out of some sort of obligation. Yeah, I feel like I'm talking to people. I wrote a book about it. You know, it impacted people. I just need to, at a certain point I realized I need to do what's important to me. And that shift was actually really helpful in the moving on process.
Did your Judaism ever come into play? Did they ever know that you were Jewish? Did that ever come out? And if so, how did that factor in?
Yeah. Well, they found out almost immediately, within the first week. It was maybe a week and a half. And I was being interrogated. I had blindfold on. And I heard them kind of piecing it all together. They were like looking at my name, and they were like, the last name of Fattal. I heard them saying Fattal, and then they say Arabic. My dad has an Arabic last name from being born in Iraq. And they said Josh, it's Yehudi, it's Jewish. And then like, oh, it must be an Arab Jew. And then they asked me, and they had already had my email, and they had seen that, they had already had my password, so they had gone through my emails and seen, are you coming home for Passover kind of things. And, and Uncle Herzl, who's in Israel, who just recently sent me a bunch of images with Hebrew text under it, of which I didn't understand, but it had a message for them, I guess. So it was very apparent to them. Background, and my family did a very, kept it out of the media in the Western world, but the Iranian government kept it out of the media as well. And then my treatment inside, this was my biggest fear, that I would be treated differently, that I would be singled out, and that somehow, as if what we were going through wasn't enough and I would get it worse. But it ended up not being a factor. And Shane and Sarah are not Jewish, and it's the same treatment. And Shane and I got the same punishment in length of time, but also in treatment. I mean, the one interaction, some people, when they found out, when guards started to find out I was Jewish, because the interrogators told people, I don't know how the word spread, some people got curious, and some people would ask some questions about Judaism. Other people would come with a sort of statement of goodwill, and they'd say, you, Moses. And they point to Shane, and I'd say, you, Jesus. And they point to, the guard would point to himself, and several guards did this, point to himself, say, Muhammad. And then he would say, one God. And so people, I even one time, years later, me and Shane would cut each other's hair in this room. They gave us an electric razor, and we would cut each other's hair. And that room was right next to the shower room. And there was this kind of opaque window that you could push open and talk to a naked man taking a shower. And so we did that because there's not much time you can talk. You're not allowed to talk to anybody, so you take any opportunity you can. And hopefully he's not too self-conscious. And so did that, and my basic Farsi and his basic English, and we get to something, and I say, who are you? Oh, American hiker, this thing, we had all the hand gestures for everything. And then he said, well, me, I'm Al-Qaeda. Iran does not like Al-Qaeda very much, so they imprison him. And then a very common question in the Middle East is kind of like, oh, are you from Georgia? Are you from New York? Are you from Illinois? What's your religion? So he says, what's your religion? And Shane just said, he looked at me like, you answer that, you decide what you want to say. And so I felt like, I said, I'm Jewish. And he said, okay. And he said, Shane, what's your religion? He said, I'm not really religious, but, I was born Christian. He says he just says Christian because it's easier. And, he just considers himself secular, but his parents are Christian family, right? So, and the Al-Qaeda guy says, look, Jew, Christian, Islam, one God, it's all good. And I'm like, well, that's impressive from Al-Qaeda. But he said, but look, if you do Islam, you'll sleep really nicely. And actually, that was, I was having insomnia, so I just let that be where it was. The thing is, that was the story. I mean, look, I don't like what I said at the end, which was, maybe we crossed 4 feet in, maybe we didn't. Is that there's actually been from several different sources, different delineations of where the border is. And what it seemed to me, in retrospect, is that they didn't know where the border is. And while I was in prison, I remember there being a ticker on the television, because they had a television in there, that said Iran and Iraq have signed agreed to make a commission to delineate the border. And I thought, I wish they did that. But right before we saw that guy, we were on the side of the hill, and we were laying to rest. We laid down for 30 minutes, having no idea we were really that close to the border at all. And it seemed like if that road was the border, then we were laying, 4 feet on the Iranian side. And we got up and we got back on the road, and we walked, and then we saw the guy.
It seemed certain, and yet you had an attorney who seemed really interested in justice for you and for Shane. And I wonder if you can tell us something more about him.
Yeah. He took on our case at his own risk, because he knew that that would be seen as being pro-American. And in fact, in the trial, he was defending us. He would stand up and defend us. We weren't allowed to talk to him, even in the courtroom. But he would stand up and defend us. And the judge, at one point, said, how can you be defending the Americans? They're our enemy. Now, they gave us this judge. This judge is, known to just give, these mindless, this kind of sentencing, as we saw. And his defense was, they are not the enemy. If you're in this government is in a fight with the American government, it's different than these individuals, and we should treat people under the rule of law. And he just tried to use the rules that they can to push it as much as possible. He knew it was rigged. He was he'd been around. They had independent lawyers, and he is one. But I think the approach of lawyers like him is to play the game as honestly as you can, and push them to live by the laws as much as they can, because their legitimacy is based on going through some process that is what they say in it. So he did that, and as you saw, he did pay a price for that at the end. But he threw out, and a lot of this I didn't find out till after, he threw out when it was dangerous or to speak out, he spoke out vehemently to the press. And so there's one thing to defend us in court. There's another thing from his position to defend us to the press. And he did that. And he did that firmly, and he spoke to the Western press. So he really was an inspiring figure for us in that way. And our families would write letters saying, you should see this lawyer. We had conference calls with him, and we did Skype with him, and he sounds totally inspiring, and he's a great guy. So, the reason he was chosen was because he was not pinned as a anti-regime lawyer. He was pinned as a truly independent lawyer. So there's some lawyers in Iran that are known to, be anti-establishment there. He wasn't. He was the honest lawyer that didn't have a big political agenda, but just really tried to, but by taking on their case, that's what happened. And actually Jason's family, Jason Rezian, contacted him to represent him. And the Iranian judge said that he was not allowed to represent him, so they had to find another lawyer.
Do you know what's become of it?
Yeah, there's not more movement, unfortunately, than from the end of the film here.
Yeah, where he can't really practice law anymore. this is, you guys have been wonderful.